Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations That Matter, the first of a three-part series where we'll be holding conversations to reflect, discuss, and explore the inclusion and diversity journey that we're all on, and how we can continue to thoughtfully progress toward building a more inclusive and diverse culture and workplace. I'm your host, Will Wagner. I've been with TEKsystems since 1996, and I've been part of our employee experience team since 2016. In this first episode, we're sitting down with TEKsystems Director of Inclusion and Diversity, Franklin Reed, as well as TEKsystems Employee Experience Executive Director, Michelle Webb. We're going to spend some time digging into the inclusion and diversity roadmap that TEKsystems has created for our organization and the steps that they've taken to drive an inclusive and diverse culture to positively impact the employee experience. We are blessed. We're so blessed to spend time with two individuals who have been part of this inclusion and diversity journey over the years as well. You could consider them trailblazers at TEKsystems, Candace Miles and Jeff Augustino. To start out, though, I'd like to give Michelle and Franklin an opportunity to introduce themselves. Michelle, could you kick us off?
Absolutely. Hi, Will. It's so great to be here with you.
It is great to have you here as well.
So we share the 1996 year. I came in 96 as well, so we'll say it's a great year.
Great year.
So over 24 years we've been here, and I started, as you did, as a technical recruiter in Colorado Springs office. And then my journey really shifted when I moved to Baltimore in 1999 to take on really being a trainer. I made the move at that point to Baltimore. And I think that is a really important part of my journey because it really did put me at the center of TEKsystems orbit.
You were at
because
headquarters.
I'm sitting at headquarters.
Yeah,
That's right.
There.
Yep. So what that does is it just gives you access, right, to people and projects and all the things that are going on that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Mm-hmm. So through that, once I got into that position, it put me at the table for a lot of different things. And I took on several roles, primarily focused on recruiting, overseeing consultant experience. And because of those roles, it put me in the position to travel a lot. And I was connecting with hundreds of our people across North America. At that time, I was also one of few women that was in a pretty visible role in leadership. And so that was when I kind of started identifying like, okay, this woman thing, it's showing up in a different way than I had expected. And I think that when I started sort of, going in and spending more time in conversations and discussing opportunities and challenges that women in business were facing, I started those conversations. People were kind of looking to me for, what's possible, and specifically young women, because they were sharing that identity with me. So that really then transitioned into having conversations with our clients and, overall diversity and inclusion. They wanted to speak about what was going on in the IT field specifically because they were seeing a lot of inequities with women in that space.
Absolutely.
That was that bridge. It was like, oh, wow, this is a challenge. I'm one of few women in this space, and they're also having some challenges. And that was really the bridge. And so I knew we were all trying to solve similar problems. And, so for me, this went from awareness and it turned into obligation that I actually wanted to use my voice as, being a leader and being connected to leaders that had the ability to make change. So it was time for me to speak up.
Sure. That's awesome.
Which was exciting. And we started looking at how we could solve different types of problems. I was still working for my own personal identity at that time, but it didn't take long once I started getting into this field that I could see how diversity of any kind really impacted an individual story and our overall company. And that was really the beginning of my journey.
That's awesome, Michelle. It just goes to show that when you follow your passion, good things happen, right? And quite an impressive journey over those 24 years. Franklin, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Well, I am actually entering the 20-year club in a couple of weeks.
Congratulations.
Like Michelle, well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Like Michelle, like yourself, and so many individuals, I started as a technical recruiter as well. But about 7 years ago, I did transition my career into the inclusion and diversity space, but it started voluntarily, really as a side hustle. I was in the role as an account executive, And I got involved in our local recruiting efforts, really supporting our efforts to hire more diverse folks and attract more diverse talent, specifically Blacks and Hispanics into TEKsystems in the Chicago market, which is where I was located. During that time, I would attend different diversity-focused career fairs and conferences like the National Sales Network and the Hispanic Sales Network. I got involved in the Association of Latino Professionals for America and a couple of other organizations. Awesome. And I did this because my experience with the company had been a very good one. But I felt like we were like a hidden jewel. We weren't attracting new talent that looked like me into the organization at the levels that I knew we should have been doing. And I saw this as my opportunity to get involved. And around that same time, ironically, Michelle reached out to me as she was deciding to expand our employee resource groups beyond our women's employee resource group at the time. And we launched a multicultural ERG. And she tapped me to lead it from a regional perspective. And I immediately said yes. It's kind of hard to say no to Michelle at times.
I was going to say, it is difficult to say no to her. I can see how that would have been a tough no for you, Franklin.
Absolutely. But I said yes. And I said yes because I was ready to pivot my career in IND, inclusion and diversity. And although I had shared with several folks prior to that moment, I had shared that at someday I hope to be running IND for the company. I wasn't ready to take the full leap yet, but leading the multicultural ERG really gave me a platform. And it gave me an opportunity to do a couple of things. One, it gave me an opportunity to develop some skills and abilities that I wasn't sure that I had matured. And I felt like this was the platform to do that. But it also gave me this opportunity to connect two things that I was passionate about. One, the organization, and then two, creating opportunity for folks that folks that look like me, as well as from other underrepresented demographics within the organization. And so I took the leap of faith. I joined the team. And about a year and a half after joining the team, I was presented with this wonderful privilege of being the leader. And now I have the great opportunity to not only lead the strategy, but also lead this wonderful team.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Franklin. That's awesome. And I appreciate both you and Michelle sharing about your experiences. Both very impressive. And I think the one word that comes to mind when I hear you talk is legacy. You both have absolutely built a legacy here. Let's start at the beginning if we could, though. Michelle, can you share where the TEKsystems inclusion and diversity journey began?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Going down this road of inclusion and diversity, it was absolutely not my plan. I was truly humbled when the leadership reached out to me and they believed in me, but I also have to say I was terrified. But we had a foundation. We already had a foundation. We had started this journey long before I walked in to lead it. So there was a starting point. We had many years before I stepped in, engaged an outside consultant to help us lay out a strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about what that strategy looked like. So there are three focus areas. Workforce, which is really about our people who we're hiring, who's working here now. We also had workplace as the second part, which is workplace is really about the environment in which we're creating for everyone to thrive, that, so they can make the progress that matters for them, while we're also living our core values as a company. And the third is that marketplace, that connection to client I talked about, how we connect our strategy internally to address our customers, which we have two, clients that buy from us and consultants that work with us. So that was the three-part strategy, and it really is a solid strategy. It still lives up to this day. I think it was the right thing that we put in place back then. What we didn't have was a plan to activate that strategy and to connect that overall strategy as an organization. So I saw my opportunity here as twofold. First, take us from strategy to execution, I think was a really big part of this. And secondly, to build a team that would include direct hires, like a Franklin Reed, to focus on these efforts, along with an army of champions and advocates that would help integrate our plans and own them at the local and team level, which is really where a lot of this stuff lives and breathes. So the TEKsystems journey, it's just that. It's, progress and I&D itself does not happen overnight. So just laying the foundation, just coming in and trying to figure out how to start planning to make the strategy come to life, it was about a year of building a team and thinking about those efforts. And we had failed efforts many years over. So it would be right to say that we had some skeptics to contend with and some feelings of failure to deal with. So with all that in front of us, building the right team was going to be critical. And so I call this original team our dream team. It was made up of some amazing individuals who are, of course, still with us today. And it was bringing people like Franklin Reed, Ian Moses, who's now running, diversity for us at AGS, Allegis Global Solutions, Eric Lee, who's now running a market for us, and Mike Powers, who continues to run our veterans and disability programs. So really, this team and being able to execute, putting them together, it might have been the smartest decision I ever made. So kudos to me for bringing the group together.
Awesome. Nice work, Michelle.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Thank you very much. They have and they were amazing partners. They have been and they still are amazing partners. And we were able to take strategy to drive real change at the local level of the organization. And we use the energy of our champions, the people that were getting involved because they care deeply, to actually make those plans come to real life and make them a reality. So even with all the buy-in, that change, it takes time. It never moves as fast as you want it to because it takes time to pull people along. But I'll tell you, at this point with this group, we were well on our way, and it was really exciting.
I heard a few things there: workforce, workplace, marketplace. And I remember being part of, the workforce at that time. And as a team member, I witnessed, right? I remember witnessing the advent and growth of our I&D strategy. And one of the things you mentioned there was the champions. And I saw this show up in the implementation of our employee resource groups. We've referred to them as ERGs, right? Franklin, I know you played a key role in the development of our ERG program. Can you share how they started and their purpose with us?
Absolutely, Will. Well, as I mentioned, the employee resource groups were my first organized foray into inclusion and diversity. And, Michelle just talked about the energy of those early champions who represented, the first people-led component of our strategy. And, the ERGs, they were and they continue to be one of the most critical, if not the most critical component of our strategy, which Michelle mentioned, aligns with the workforce, workplace, and marketplace. The ERGs became a mechanism for people to get involved. And, when you have hundreds of people engaged, it creates inertia, it creates momentum, and that momentum really fueled our progress. And it also put a nice polite pressure on the organization to continue to evolve. Initially, those ERGs, they serve, as a platform for people with similar interests or shared experiences and identities to come together as a community and, more of a safe space to connect without feeling like you have to provide context or background or, you feel like you have to manage yourself when you're in the presence of people who just get you. That's really what the ERGs created for a lot of folks. The initial charter was built around recruiting and education and celebration. But what's happened over their evolution is that they've since matured. They've matured into business-focused groups that, although we still refer to them as ERGs, what they've done is they've kept their original focus of recruiting, education, and celebration, but they have also added this professional and business development component to their strategy. And in many cases, many of them are driving real bottom line revenue to the business. Also, the ERGs have expanded. We've gone beyond, our women's ERG and our multicultural ERG, and we now have 5 different ERGs, including our Next Gen, our Pride, and Honor ERGs. And we've also expanded beyond that to include employee networks. Now, what's the difference between the two? Well, before the COVID pandemic forced us to go 100%, remote and virtual, we had already recognized the need to foster connections across offices and across the country. And so we launched the ERGs do truly have this business connection and component where the employee networks, their primary focus is to create this safe space and this platform for people to connect. And today, we have hundreds of employees involved in our ERGs and employee networks, and many of them are involved in multiple. But Michelle mentioned some of these early champions. It's not lost on us and me as someone who led, the ERGs from a regional perspective. It's not lost on us on the amount of energy and effort it takes to not only launch one in a local office or to launch an employee network off the ground. It takes people who are willing to not only just participate, but to lead. And I'm really excited that, we're going to hear from 2 of those early leaders who, I like to call them their mentors now or OGs, as I like to call them.
Like the ERG OGs. I love it.
There you go. I love that.
And thanks for breaking that down. And I think it is interesting as you watch the progression, and you even mentioned the momentum, right? To see where these ERGs are now, and also these employee networks. And I've had an opportunity to be engaged in the employee networks. And you're right. It's a great space. It's a safe space to come and to connect with people in this virtual world, specifically around things that are near and dear to our heart. So from my heart, it's appreciated. So thank you for that. Michelle, as you look back over the years, could you provide us some insight into the evolution of the TEKsystems I&D journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Franklin did touch on some of it, but really there's so much great work that TEKsystems has been doing over time. And really the people that have helped us lead the way are at the heart of any success that we've had. So for me, as someone responsible for the actual progress, not just feeling like we're trying to do the right thing, but actually seeing results right happen, because that's right. Results, that's a big deal. We have to see change. So when you tie the efforts that you feel make sense into real business challenges and strategic priorities, that's where you start to get some flow here. That's where we start to actually see things happen.
Okay.
So, Franklin talked a little bit about the ERGs because they moved from feel good to do good. They were doing feel good, which we called food, fun, and festivities, into really do good, which was about really targeted solutions that were supporting already in motion efforts at their local and team levels. So that was where we could actually see moving into a strategic focus of execution to get results, and it not just feeling good to be in that situation. It's the same for the company at the highest level. So when we decided that we would add, it was not really a strategic priority. And once we decided to add it as one of our 4 strategic priorities, so there's only 4 main priorities, and inclusion and creating an inclusive environment became one of those strategic priorities. Well, that shifted the whole focus for us as a company, because now it was ingrained. It wasn't something off to the side that we're just doing separately. It was a part of our business. It was a part of what we said you had to be a part of to be at TEKsystems, which then enables things like accountability and resources to make sure that that's being done across the organization. So that's been the biggest evolution, is kind of going from that feel good to do good and true execution on our efforts.
Well, yeah, and I think when I hear that too, it takes it, and this is a label that certain things get in every organization, and Tech's not immune to it, but like the flavor of the month, it takes it away from just being that moment, and it turns into a cornerstone of who we are as an organization. And so,
absolutely.
That's awesome. So when you look at that, right, and you look back, what would you say has been key to the development and then the implementation of that strategy to make it from the feel good to the do good?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I think the challenges with I&D come into the fact that they feel so big and so complex. And, we're not the only company trying to solve for this, like not even close. Every company is dealing with this. Right. So these efforts in this world of diversity, in this world of inclusion, they're very personal, and there's a societal angle to them. So there's a lot of sensitivity at times. And so because of that sensitivity and that energy that we have to put into it, we get tired fast because the work is hard.
Yes.
So one is staying the course and not allowing us to get the drag to pull us down. But the other is about getting really specific and focused around the problem you're trying to solve for. So what's the root that we're trying to solve for, and get targeted, and then find ways to do that in small ways that you can eventually scale to bigger ways. So to give an example, when I first came in, I could see that we had an issue retaining and promoting women specifically. They were here, they were at the organization, but they weren't thriving the same way that our men were. We could see that through attrition. We could see that through success. We could see that through promotion. So we did a data analysis to figure out what our problems were, and then we targeted solution ideas that we thought would disrupt and help us get out of that rut. But we had a different problem with our people of color. We weren't bringing people of color into the organizations at the right pace. So we weren't, the target focus had to be different. We weren't going to do the same thing for all populations because we had different problems to solve for. So if you kind of look at that women, to break it down, we started by understanding the root cause. Then we built out a specific solution targeting that problem. And one of the original solutions was to intervene earlier into our women's development opportunity and give them time to grow and explore and be challenged early on to take some of the anxiety out from down the road, as well as connecting them to the right sponsors and mentors so they could get the development support they needed. So this program, which became Emerge, the program called Emerge, we tested it out with a really small group in the Southeast. We had one vice president and one very driven leader who was willing to help us build it. We built it out in the Southeast, and it was such a success that it has become a flagship development program for us that we now put hundreds of people through in a year. And it's now available to all of our people from all different backgrounds. And we do this, we've been doing this now for over 5 years. And we have seen the impact. As an example, when we were targeting women's specific challenges, we could see that by having Emerge now at that starting point, we were only getting at any given time 30% of our women going into our leadership development programs. Our last, so not enough, clearly, at 50% of the population. Right. Now, with the last 2 years, 60+% have been women in our leadership development programs. So we're starting to see the fruits of our labor, but it takes time. So there's some patience required, but there is some targeting of specific solutions. And then you've got to try stuff, start small, and then you scale it out to meet the organizational needs. I think that's the best way to take these initiatives and make them real.
You're right. When you look at some of these things, it can feel overwhelming, but that targeted approach not only made the impact there, that's a huge jump. Right? Significant jump. More room to grow, but significant jump. Franklin, love to ask you this. There's been a lot accomplished, and I know that you would both agree there's a lot more to come, right? That there's no secret there. But with that being said, how has TEKsystems led change and an informed strategy?
Yeah. There are a number of things that contribute to the change and the strategy. I genuinely believe that our foremost accomplishment is the empowerment and the agency that our people feel to get involved. Now, I&D is not solely the responsibility of the inclusion and diversity team, and it will fail if it feels like it is their responsibility and it's some separate thing off to the side. Which is why my forehead wrinkles a little bit every time I hear people refer to I&D as and I'm doing air quotes, program. It's not a program, it's a strategy. And so I think that foremost accomplishment is that we've normalized the concepts and conversation of I&D in our business. I'll mention that 2 years ago, we launched our executive inclusion board, whose job is really to ensure that the foundations and values of inclusion and diversity really permeate the entire organization.
Sure. Wow. As Michelle mentioned, there's a lot of hard work, and just hearing what you guys have done is making me exhausted, talking to you about it. It's a lot, right? I mean, we can all see that it has not been light work. And when you're driving change as well, there is that force sometimes that's in your way as well, right? So not just the effort, but working through change. And a lot of people in effort, right, have gone, or a lot of people's efforts, I should say, have gone into this. There's no doubt. So what do you feel, Franklin, has been one of the biggest steps that TEKsystems has made to build an inclusive and diverse foundation for the organization as a whole?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I do think that the establishment of our executive inclusion board being led by our president, Jay Alvather, and comprised of roughly 20, senior executive leaders across the company has had the biggest impact on the velocity of our progress.
That's great.
And I think it did two things. One, the establishment of the board and the charter and strategy and initiatives that the board laid down really provided tremendous clarity for why I&D is important. And we were able to define what inclusion means at TEKsystems. And, we define it today as the responsibility that everyone has to practice unbiased empathy. And we look for the opportunities to incorporate the unique perspectives of every individual so that we create this sense of belonging. If we do that right, our people will be empowered to become the best version of themselves. And not only will they achieve their individual goals, but as an organization, we'll also be able to achieve sort of that collective opportunity that's before us. But I also think the second thing that the establishment of the board created is that it created a pathway that enabled us to elevate nurturing and inclusive work culture to the organizational strategic level. And now we have, these enterprise I&D initiatives that touch, the entire organization. We have leaders that are expected to connect to it. There's impact that's being measured and reported on. And, it really creates this consistent theme that you hear from across the organization. That
leadership, obviously buy-in and drive is significant there. There's no doubt about it. And it becomes part of the fabric, right? Versus, like you mentioned earlier, it was a great point you made that it's not a program, it's a strategy, but it does become part of the fabric of the organization. So it's been great to hear from you and Michelle and from our employee experience and ID leadership team, right? So, however, we recognize that movements really start when those leaders, you all, pull in those first followers, and which in turn, are significant leaders themselves. So I'm excited because we're going to get a chance to spend some time with those folks. And you'd mentioned them earlier, those individuals that are now the mentors in these programs. But we're going to get a chance to spend some time with Candace and Jeff. Their focus on building that inclusive and diverse culture spans outside the four walls of TEKsystems. Candace, I would love to hear a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Will. I really appreciate it, and I'm so excited to talk to you and the team. I am based in North Carolina. I have been with TEKsystems for a little over 11 and a half years, and I, like many other partners, began in our technical recruiting capacity for a bit, but I have been in business development, account management, and client success as my key focus for about the past decade or so. That's really always been my passion, really focusing on connecting the dots, sharing insightful information with other parties, and building honest and mutually beneficial relationships and partnerships. And so being in a role that allows me that in a lead capacity to help guide others, but also partner with our clients and our consultants is my current focus.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Candace. It's great to have you here. Jeff, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Hey, Will, thanks so much for this opportunity today. Sure, I started with TEKsystems in 2013 up in Seattle as a delivery manager with Global Services. In October of 2015, I returned back to Atlanta. Also in 2015, the Marriage Equality Act was passed into law, and that gave me an opportunity to be reunited with an old friend of mine, Trevor. And interesting story here. So upon our second date at our favorite pizza parlor, I proposed to him at the restaurant.
Oh, that's awesome.
And everyone started clapping, and then it got onto social media. One of my old VPs at another position I worked at saw that and bought everyone a round of drinks. So
that's congratulations. That's awesome.
So I wasn't really out to the company yet. And so the Christmas party was coming up, and so now here I was married, and I was speaking with Natalie Collins, who's one of our national recruiters, and then at the time we had Scott Farber, who was one of the DBOs in the Atlanta office, and so. We had this conversation, and he said, now's a better time to do it. This is a better time than any. So at the Christmas party, I took Trevor there and was introduced to everyone, and we really had a great time. And that's what started the whole thing, was just those first moments.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Candace, you mentioned something I'd like to go back to for a second, and Franklin discussed it as well earlier. It's the formation of the ERGs. Can you talk a little bit more about them and your involvement, impact over the course of time with TEKsystems?
Absolutely. I will say that first and foremost, when it comes to formation of any type of employee resource group or affinity group or just, shared interest, I always say that, and I tell this and advise and help mentor that one or individuals have to care, you have to listen, and you have to do. From an operations and logistics standpoint, I have to give kudos to our I&D office for providing the blueprint or the playbook that allows those who are new to this, who have no idea where do I begin, to understand what is a charter, what do committees look like within an employee resource group. If you're going to have one that's local versus regional versus national, how do you structure your meetings? What is an annual operating plan, and why is that important? I think back again years ago, more and more documents, more and more bits of information were compiled in a repository that allowed someone like myself, who again is in a completely different function for the company, to say, hey, to also get other areas of enjoyment and professional and personal development, I can go to our intranet and I can find out about what these documents mean and share them with some of my other colleagues who want to make this happen and take it from there. So really relying on what's already provided, I think, is hugely helpful. It does not mean that that is the end all be all, because I'm all about some innovating and doing things that haven't been done because they're the right thing to do. But starting with work that other parties have already done to help you get where you want to go is never a bad thing. Additionally, when it comes to setting up our ERGs, and I think Franklin mentioned that, we have hundreds of employees who are part of dozens of different types of ERGs, such as multicultural, women at tech, pride at tech, honor, family, so many others. I always advocated for ensuring that a formal leader by title was able to support and understand the criticality of whatever the employee resource group or affinity network was. Whether they were a member of said demographic, honestly, that was irrelevant. Them understanding why some of their employees or all of their employees wanted to participate or wanted to be a part of setting up a structure that focused on more inclusivity was and is always critical. And so care, understand operations and logistics, and get support of your leadership partners. And you can really make a difference within your organization for on behalf of an ERG or employee network.
Thanks for sharing that. Jeff, how are you seeing, because Candace mentioned here the leadership involvement and how important that is. So how are you seeing the leadership show their involvement in this I&D journey?
Sure. I would say primarily in 2015, when we started building out our Pride at Tech ERG, Meg Hartezi and at the time John Chafin were very active as executive sponsors. I was asked to play a role as an national lead for Pride at Tech. We then met in Baltimore. We had an ERG meeting up in Baltimore to discuss the vision, the roadmap, goals, and set up ERG leads. At that time, we had J.L. Vather came to the meeting along with Leighton Harris and Michelle Webb. And then Franklin Reed and I formed a partnership over the years, and we really started a grassroots movement the following years by doing office tours. I would go out to all the different markets and do the Pride at Tech presentation. And working with RVPs, DBOs, we were able to get more engagement. In addition to Pride events, we have our safe zones, which we have Pride at Tech magnets that are in the offices to indicate an area where someone who may not be coming out at this time feels comfortable to have an advocate to speak to, which has really got solidarity across the offices. And then we move into marketplace strategies from there. Once we get the workforce and workplace initiatives set, in 2016, the tragedy at the Pulse nightclub, where 49 people were taken from us, really affected me. Mm-hmm. It was a horrible thing. I contacted leadership to let them know that I was going to drive down to Orlando just to be there to support my community. So I left Atlanta. I drove down to Orlando. I immediately met with the first responders, providing donuts and coffee and making sure that they were okay, talking to the physicians, the medical team, the fire department, the police department. Through this, in addition to going to our offices in Orlando, both our delivery center in Orlando and our Orlando office, I held presentations and actually care for team members that may have had family or friends affected by the shooting. And in 2017, I then got a call from the police chief that they were going to be awarding TEKsystems the highest civilian citizenship award for us. For what we did during that time. So I went back down to Orlando, accepted the ceremony award, met with the mayor, the governor. It's been phenomenal, the success we've been able to achieve in such a short period of time. So pretty cool stuff, Will. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, there's some structured meetings, it sounds like, where the executive leadership's involved, but then it also just sounds like that, once again, it goes back to the caring. They're showing their care through their interactions, phone calls, being present for those things. So thanks for sharing that, Jeff. I'm sure as you look back in the late 80s, early 90s, you probably, maybe you did expect, but the changes you're making here at TEKsystems, I'm not sure if you saw that, but it's appreciated for the involvement that you have had in driving this change.
Thank you.
The impacts are big, and those events are getting bigger and bigger. So appreciate that. You know, like I mentioned, I've been here since the 90s. I've seen change, but we also all agree that we've got a lot of room for growth. And I have to imagine that when you work in an office where you look different or you have a different background, it must be difficult to drive that change, to get people to see things differently. You know, and I've got to believe, and I know we are an empathetic organization, but I've got to believe that's still difficult, regardless of how much empathy we show, for someone to truly recognize what someone's dealing with, or has even dealt with. Candace, I'd love to hear from you on some of the things that you've done to help drive this change, you know, in your market and across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as I reflected and think back, throughout my life, there have been a number of moments and instances where being the only person that, you know, looks like me in a room is not common. And it's not something that I brag about or boast about or have ever liked, because I think, you know, for some folks, being the standout, the unique entity, it's a great thing. And it is inherently. But it's always been why are things like this? I am a native Southerner, born in Georgia, grew up in South Carolina. Now I've been building my life in North Carolina. And there are a lot of parties that look like me. So when I go into certain settings, be it within my own company or within my client environments, and I don't see that, it's never sat right with me. And I think because, as I mentioned before, I have been encouraged by family, friends, loved ones to be someone who is a mindful person, who is an observant person, who listens, but also speaks truth to power. I've mentioned some of those settings and scenarios to my colleagues at TEKsystems, to my clients, even when it didn't seem like the most comfortable or opportune moment to do so, because inherently that was the right thing. As a Black woman working within an technology-based recruiting and sales-oriented company, there's so many microaggressions I've faced, again, both internally and externally, just being fully transparent here. And it makes you think, well, if I've had to endure these things and I've had to take a big sigh and explain certain matters over the years, and how, going to one of our first national sales summits and literally being able to count on one hand for a national meeting how many people look like me, and folks aren't getting that, I don't want other people to come in and feel the same and say, you know what, this is not something I want to endure. So I think having the experiences and sharing those firsthand, and also listening, as I mentioned earlier, as time went on and as people did listen, and we began to focus more on ensuring that we reflected the communities and the societies that we're a part of and that we were that we want to serve, I think my voice continued to also get stronger, because I was realizing that, again, I need to listen, but I also need to speak to make this environment the best that it can be. And so I've always remembered to be thoughtful, fair, again, creative and innovative in the ideas that I've had, or at least try to be. Obviously, can't say that that's been the case for every idea by any means. Yet, when they're not necessarily received, but I just know either something in my gut or what I'm reading and what I'm understanding says this is something that does deserve awareness and interest, stick to it. The timing may be off, but it will matter. And I think if we look at present day, we're seeing that some things are overdue. Some conversations, some actions, many actions and conversations are overdue. And if parties listen to those that really can provide perspective, because not only do they have to navigate being a part of being either marginalized or a minority group in a majority and thriving in a fashion that may or may not be their immediate first instinct or approach, they have the perspective of, well, what if we did something this way? So I apply that to our ERGs as well when I'm coaching and mentoring and helping to guide folks, again, locally, regionally, or nationally. I talk about that. When you can think about, all right, maybe my office isn't really excited about this ERG, but I'm a part of a community that has businesses and professionals that I'm recruiting and hiring managers and directors and VPs that want to know more. Why don't I start there? And so to speak to specific examples, I've absolutely presented to clients on the data that I've gathered from partnering with our I&D team, from firsthand anecdotes from professionals and their experiences, and have had the wonderful opportunity to partner and collaborate with clients and ERGs, because maybe they're thinking of the same approaches, or they're curious about challenges, and candidly, they're not hearing this or an interest in this from other companies within our industry and with other firms that are similar to us. So taking the time to make cultural events that absolutely are very inclusive, but sometimes are glossed over in terms of the reality of what might have inspired that celebration or that event, like talking about that and sharing that information, so that people can understand aspects of privilege and, hey, why haven't I heard of this? Oh, wow, why didn't I know? A third of the world celebrated this holiday. Combining that with celebratory or, more positive ways to connect has led to success both outside of the walls and in the walls at Tech, and provided proof that often I feel like I should not have had to have just to get the idea and get the support going internally. But sometimes it's strengthened even more by going externally and showing, hey, this is really important to us and to others.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for thinking creatively and thinking outside the four walls of tech, because I think sometimes we kind of keep everything within the four walls. And to your point, you reached out outside, you made connections that way, but reaching outside the walls of tech makes sense with this, because this is not only a TEKsystems challenge or a movement, right? This is societal. This is something that as a society we're recognizing we need to drive hard and fast towards. So how do you see, Candace, if you could share how you see the crossover between society and TEKsystems and where in the inclusion and diversity initiatives?
Yeah, I think that we are, both TEKsystems and collective society are in a very interesting place right now. I know that seems like a simple answer, but other words come to mind, such as surreal, frustrating, fascinating. What in the world's going on, right? But it's a time that I'm hoping, from the perspective of us looking back, in years ahead, we realize a lot of excellent change occurred. Essentially, I'm, on one hand, proud of my organization, and I've been here for so long for a reason, because of how I feel like I'm consistently challenged in a positive way that isn't necessarily, isn't exploiting or, making me do a disproportionate amount of labor to be heard. I wouldn't be here if that were the case, Will. That isn't okay. And I think a lot of companies have to come and to terms with that and reckon with that. So I feel like I'm able to do the business objectives and aspects of making the lives of people in our communities, because we recruit talent. Our business is not widgets. It's bringing people together to help achieve key objectives that make this world go round. So I get to do all of that, and that's awesome. And I also get to say, hey, it's awesome, but it's not perfect. And that's society too. There are some things that, we need to change right this moment. And no, I don't think this is a good idea. And here's the why. And here's who I think we should have on this platform. I get to say those things. And I think that's really critical, again, in an organization that, like ours, who does affect, so many people. And so for society, again, we'd have to do a whole nother podcast to talk about where we are and where we could go.
Yep. But we're gonna do it. We're doing it.
Good. But I'm glad to see, for the parties that, if we go back to, listen, care, and do. Some people are trying to do that, and for the parties that are not, the people who are taking an active action and effort to call a spade, if you will, are doing so. And it's where I think we are. We have a ways to go, but perhaps this time that we're in is for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing that. And the efforts and the work that you all have put us in a spot to be able to say something like, it's awesome, but it's not perfect. Right. And so I appreciate everybody for that. And thank you all for sharing your thoughts today. Thank you for giving us the history and the steps that led us and led us on this journey where this inclusion diversity journey is going to continue, right? But to where we are today. And I'm excited to share more about our present and future and upcoming episodes. Franklin, I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit more as we wrap up here and we head into the next two parts of our series. But if you could kind of close us out from our time learning more about our past.
Yeah, thanks again, Will, and thanks for doing such a wonderful job of connecting with us today. What I find interesting about all of the people who are engaged in this work across the organization, we're really quick to celebrate the progress we've made, but we're equally as quick to acknowledge how much work there is still yet to do. And, I think that's because, there's this popular Bible verse that says, to the person who's been given much responsibility is required. And I really do believe that applies to TEKsystems because we know where we want to go. We know, and we have a tremendous amount of understanding around some of these concepts. So, we've been given much, which means that we have a tremendous responsibility to stay focused, to bring it into fruition. And so, there's this responsibility for us to continue to challenge ourselves, and the effort, the resources, the initiatives that were necessary to support our goals before COVID and the social and racial unrest I think we all agree isn't sufficient for what we're going to need, not just today, but, even in the future. And, COVID and some of the unrest has really brought to light a lot of the structural challenges that have existed for centuries, but it's really brought it to light. And so for us, we're going to continue to explore systems and behaviors that reinforce inequity and creates unnecessary hurdles to opportunity. We're going to continue to challenge some of our norms, that no longer serve us. We're going to continue to explore and introduce greater accountability for ourselves, for our leaders. And we're going to continue talking and continuing to seek to understand each other.
Thanks, Franklin. Appreciate that. And thanks again to all of our guests. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Conversations That Matter, folks. Stay tuned for our next episode when we're going to get the opportunity to learn more about TEKsystems' current state of inclusion and diversity efforts.